Welcome to the Does Anything Matter podcast, where Patrick and Pepin talk about the most age-old question of does anything actually matter? Welcome to the damn podcast. This is Pepin, and this is
Patrick.
And today, we're going to talk about something that's just going to be probably the easiest thing to talk about that we've ever talked about. It's going to be the meaning of life.
So, when you say easy, I mean, it because there's such a broad range of opinion about this, I think it'll be easy for us to kind of go off. But it's not exactly easy because I think most people would say that this topic's sort of a moving target. Wouldn't you agree?
Right. Well, so I think the hard part of the topic is saying anything of substance, and also the idea that, okay, I'm just going to start giving my opinion here, or my thoughts. So I think life doesn't have a meaning, and not in the sense that life has no meaning, but in the sense that when you say that life has a meaning, or life has this, or life has that, you're kind of attributing the property which actually doesn't exist to that thing. So it's kind of like me, looking at, say, let's say I ask, what color is that table? You could say brown, right? But let's say I ask you, what color is the number 2? I mean, color is not a property of numbers. You could maybe argue that, color, like numbers have to do with wavelength and can relate to that, blah, blah, blah. But, just take that example as face value. Color, not a property of numbers. The question doesn't make sense. And so my idea here is that asking what is the meaning of life is kind of like asking what is. So my idea here is essentially that in order to ask a question, you have to presuppose that thing is an attribute of the thing that's in question, right? Like you can't ask about color unless a thing has color. In the same way, when you ask what's the meaning of life, you're presupposing that there is like some sort of meaning. And you could talk about like opaque things, right? So what's the color of this piece of glass, right? It's see-through. There's no color to it, right? So that makes sense because color still could be an attribute of that glass. There's still potentiation there, right? But in the case of, say, life, or let's say, what number is that glass? I mean, number doesn't apply to glasses. You could talk about how many different glasses there are, but, there's nothing inherent to the glass that has a number quantity to it. It's more the measurement of, like, a certain combination of those molecules and, separateness and stuff like that.
Okay. Well, so as usual, ever the scientist over here, right? First of all, I'm going to have a rebuttal for this, right? But if you're watching this video and you like content like this, then go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe so you can see more podcasts with Pepin and Patrick. Anyway, without further ado, your reference to color is actually an interesting example. And I say that because there are some people out there who are colorblind. Mm-hmm. So when you say that you can't attribute color to something like, say, a number, right? Someone who's colorblind doesn't really attribute color to anything. And like you could tell that person that certain things have colors, but that doesn't mean anything to them because they've never seen those colors. So really what all that color is a rationalization. It's a disposition given to objects that allow us to make sense of the world. It's similar to a discussion about time, for example, where, okay, time, it technically exists, but the only reason why it exists is because we rotate in space, or the planet rotates around the sun, right? And that sort of determines time. But if the planet stood still, there would be no perception of time. So perhaps we wouldn't have any use for it.
See, I don't quite agree with that. Well, because in the instance of, what's the first example again?
Color.
Right. So in the sense of color, there's something objective there, right? So in the case of color, the objectivity is photons, right? So photons with particular wavelength. And of course, we're only seeing some broad, some very, very small spectrum of the broad spectrum, just like 670 nanometers to some, other range. So it's not that the color doesn't, it corresponds to something real. There's something out in the existence that's there. And it just so happens we have a certain machine called the eyes to actually see it. And there's things that are outside of perception. So if you take scientists and they have, like, say, infrared spectrums, or infrared technology where you can see infrared stuff, or there's spectrometers where they can kind of look at, like, say, the composition of molecules and atoms. So those things go outside our, say, visual acuity or outside our perception. You talk about, say, how different astronomers have kind of detected, say, certain gravity pulses. Like there's that one a little while ago where a black hole collapsed and you kind of saw the gravity wave from that. So there's those things outside of human perception and sense making, say, data for humans, but it's something that we could still see through, say, through different complicated sense making machines that we created, right? And we trust the machines because the machines correspond with our model and our of reality. It's essentially the scientific method. So the fact that something's outside of our own personal, say, comprehension or ability to sense does not mean it's not there. In the same way that, the fact that colorblind people, a lot of times there's colorblind to one thing. Let's say the colorblind to the whole spectrum. They still can verify that color exists. I mean, one, just by proxy of other people, because you could see that, you see color, that person sees color, all the other people see color in your tribe. So, color must exist. There's something I can't see that they can. So that's true. But even then, let's say this person studies a little bit of physics and they have some sort of video sort of thing where they can videotape a certain scene and they can look at the RBG values of it. You can say, oh yeah, there's something here. I don't see a difference between this and this, but this, say, tool, which is, say, objective and just modeling the real world accurately, is seeing something different that I can't. And these other people are seeing these things which are different. Therefore, I can relate these two things and, correlate them.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there, but essentially what you're saying, there's two things, I think, that within your own argument actually undermine your argument, okay? The first thing is that if you're saying that there's objective information that is out there, that, let's say, even you can't perceive it, doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? Essentially, that argument is the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. So you could apply that same argument to, say, the existence of God. Some people might say, if you can prove to me God exists, I'll believe in it, right? Colorblind person might say, I've never seen the color red, but, there's some inclination that it might be out there. Other people believe that it's there, and I can see objectively that there's something different about it, right? But the absence of being able to see red does not prove that red doesn't exist. So when we refer that back to the question, which is what is the meaning of life, right? Maybe we can't perceive the meaning of life. Maybe there isn't a criteria that we are yet capable of seeing. Perhaps all of us are colorblind to whatever the criteria is that allows us to discern the meaning of life. So at the very least, we can conclude that, again, the absence of evidence of the meaning of life does not then become the evidence that the meaning of life is absent. Does that make sense?
I think it does, but I think my objection to it is more the technical point where, like, meaning can't possibly apply to life because, number one, life is a high-level concept. Like, what is life, right? I mean, life is just a term used to describe certain configuration of molecules that happen to move in some way that, have some sort of purpose, right? Some sort of self-direction to them.
Well, okay, let's draw a distinction, because I think that for us to properly have this argument, we're both on different spectrums of this argument, right? You are making a scientific argument, and you are viewing life as an organism and like a scientific progression. You're saying life starts as molecules and it progresses, it evolves into this and that, right? But when the question, what is the meaning of life, right? Maybe you can't attribute meaning to birth or growth or any like scientific process. But what about the human brain and the human disposition, right? We have the ability to critically think, which separates us from other life forms. So the meaning of life is a question that is not asked by most organisms. So you can't apply a scientific condition to the question because the question is not asked in a scientific way.
So this is where I'm a little bit confused here because we can get into the topic of whether humans can create meaning, right? Because I do believe the idea that there may not be a meaning to life, but that doesn't mean we can't create our own meaning, right? But that's like an added on component to it, right? It's like by default, matter is not intelligent, but you get this certain configuration, and through evolution or whatever you might think, there's these added components to it. So I think we can search for our meanings, we can find meanings for ourselves, but it doesn't mean necessarily that there's this thing that existed prior that we're tapping into.
So what I would then draw from that, it sort of leads to what my personal opinion is here, right? So far, really, all I've done is try to deconstruct your argument because I'm a jerk, but I'll tell you what my actual opinion is, which is that the meaning of life is to find meaning. And I think that it goes perfectly to what you're saying, is that if you're a intelligent life form that's capable of critical thought and perception and interpretation even, then perhaps what our duty actually is here is to figure out what that is.
When you say duty, how do you mean that exactly? Like, where's duty coming from, or what?
Well, I suppose duty is not the right word, but whether you want it to manifest in some form of destiny or whether it's just simply the pursuit of happiness, I think that what many of us long for is an answer. We want to know exactly why we're here and what we're supposed to be doing. Many of us spend years and years confused about this and searching for something. And we wish there was a concrete answer, but there just isn't. And, we've been around for thousands and thousands of years, right? So you think somebody would have figured it out by now. But is this because, in fact, this isn't a scientific question and there isn't an answer? Or is it what you said, which is that the question is a fallacy to begin with?
So I just want to be clear here. So the proposition here is that there's something intrinsic that, like, to the, say, human condition, let's say in general, maybe not applicable to everybody, right? But applicable to most people, where they have this inner drive for meaning. And is that the fact that they have a rational faculty, or is it the fact that there's something, say, outside of that kind of derives?
I think that it goes back to what we talked about on a previous podcast, which is reality versus perception. I think that it's not necessarily a faculty, but it's sort of subtle urge, a primal sort of driving that takes us to this place of trying to find purpose. And we might not be doing it consciously. Like, you might not wake up today and say, I'm going to pursue the purpose of my life, right? But when you develop hobbies, when you make friends, when you go and try and find a career that suits you, all of these are activities that, like, we don't necessarily attribute to the meaning of life. We kind of just see them as going through our life. But but that's what we're doing, right? We're looking for things that fulfill us. If you have a hobby that you don't enjoy, then you're not likely to continue doing it, right? Because there's no incentive to do it, right? You're not getting paid to do it. You're not enjoying it. So why would you do it? It's because it doesn't offer you meaning, right? And this might be a subliminal thing, but again, I think it's something that all of us have.
Right. I'm trying to, because I think I disagree, like, on a technical point, but I agree with you on a general point. Like, I believe, like, I think that's true on a psychological, like, point of view. Like, the one kind of sort of thing I kind of disagree with is, like, I think that it's part of a good mental mindset, or it's a positive psychology to have a meaning. But I think most people aren't looking for meaning; rather, they're looking to stave off the thought of death. Like this is not my idea, but there's some psychologists out there who had this idea that most humans, they just try to distract themselves with the question of death by just being productive, right? Their whole life is spent just doing stuff. That way they don't think about their own mortality. And, that might be one of the big drivers of kind of us doing things, because, humans are just naturally productive because we became aware of our death. That makes us conscious. And then we try to just get our minds off the fact that we're going to die by doing stuff, by distracting ourselves with stuff that is productive. And so like think of most people, they get home and they watch TV. They get home, they do this. They get home, they do that. They start gardening, like a whole bunch of stuff. And you can say those things give meaning, but or some sort of entertainment. But I think really it's just taking their mind off, say, the reality of things, and they're not actually striving for anything that's greater.
Well, I think whoever that person was who did that study is a kook, to be honest.
Whoa.
Because that's ridiculous. I mean, people don't sit around thinking, oh, gee, I don't want to think about death today. I think there are some people that fear death, but I think more common are people that say that they don't want to have regrets when they get older. That might be a version of what that person was saying with their study, but I don't think it's that people are trying to distract themselves from death. Some people, sure. But I think most people more or less are looking for meaning. And they don't say it like that, but I've personally heard many times, and I'm sure you have, somebody say, when I'm retired, I don't want to look back and have regrets. Or, I don't want to not have kids and then when I'm older wish I had them. Or vice versa. People have those types of thoughts all the time, 20 years from now, what am I going to think about my decisions right now, right? Those conversations are actually meaning of life conversations, because they're saying, I don't know what my purpose is here. Is my purpose to have kids? Mm. And if I don't have kids, will I discover in 20, 30 years down the road that having kids might have been my purpose and now it's too late, right? So it's not necessarily that they fear death, it's that they fear dying without having found the reason for being here.
I mean, though that kind of say replaces meaning with just long-term regret planning, right? Because now you're just trying to avoid, say, guilt, or what you fear is just long-term regret, right? So, oh, hey, if I don't do this now, I'm going to regret this in the future, right? So you're just planning to avoid future emotions.
Yeah, but those are two sides of the same coin, because if you have, they're opposite ends, right? Fear and guilt are emotions that exist because there's counterbalancing emotion, right? If you feel nothing about something, then you wouldn't have regret exactly. And same thing, if you think that you're right, say if you're in an argument, you think that you're right and you think you're justified and you have no feelings toward the other person at all, right? You're not likely to feel guilt. Or if you do, you feel much less guilt in a situation than you would if it's with someone you love, or maybe the situation's more ambiguous. So the fact that you have regrets or guilt at all means that at some point that you had an opposite emotion, subconsciously or consciously, attributed to that situation. So in this case, regret is a negative emotion that is tied to the yearning for purpose. Mm-hmm. Right? Because otherwise, what would be the counterbalance? You don't just wake up one day and regret something. You regretted it because at one point you desired it. Maybe even if it was subliminal. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but I'm not sure if it fully answers any question, because it kind of puts a motivation. It's the motivation behind the motivation. Because your there's certain kind of purposes, right? Because there's one purpose which might be to create something, right? So it's something you're kind of striving for. But the other thing is, you might be kind of avoiding the regret in the kind of way you're saying. So not having kids is something you might be trying to avoid a future, whereas the other futures might, go towards. But, the question is whether that's kind of inherent to things, because I don't think it's natural for people to seek out meaning. I think it's natural for people to feel meaning and kind of have these long-term planning strategies. I think it's normal, that's natural, but I don't think it's necessarily inherent. And I think this is kind of the main discussion here is, number one, whether people generally seek meaning, because I don't think they do. I think people just kind of just go with the flow and just kind of live their lives just in a willy-nilly kind of way, and not criticizing that. I mean, you could say that's how I live my life to some degree as well, but I'm also trying to say that maybe the search for meaning is something that's a higher level, say, kind of search, and it's more unusual than we would want to pretend.
I don't think so. I think it is inherent in a way, but I don't think it's conscious in a lot of people. So I think it might present the way that you describe, which is people just going through their lives willy-nilly doing whatever they're doing, but they make choices intentionally. And, that, again, that could be a subconscious search for meaning. And the reason why people have fears and regrets is because they had counterbalancing emotions, like I said. So something you said earlier is that people fear death and they try to distract themselves from it, right? Not your opinion, but let's say that...
It's my opinion as well, but yeah, not my argument.
Gotcha. So, but anyway, let's say that's true, just for the sake of the argument I'm making, that people are trying to defer death by doing other things. That means that they fear death. So why though? Because if their life doesn't mean anything and they don't desire meaning, then where does the fear come from? Just from lack of existence? Or is it because they want to have existed for a reason?
Well, I think the fear comes from, just lack of existence. I mean, also the fear of the unknown, because, a lot of people who might fear death don't necessarily know what death is. And that's kind of the fear there, because the death is kind of a catch-all. But yeah, we're also kind of programmed to fear death, right? Because, just take natural evolutions, organisms don't want to die because if that organism dies, it doesn't pass on its genes. Or another way to put it is that the organisms that didn't fear death tended to die more. The ones that did, tended to survive more. So, maybe a big part of human evolution, who knows, but is, that fear of death being implemented in ways that can structure, say, longer term living arrangements and strategies. And that fear might be, say, incumbent to human survival because, humans fear death, so they try to mitigate death through, say, creating a shelter, making crops, hunting, just kind of having long-term planning activities and strategies, and also taking care of their health, a whole bunch of things that they could do that other animals may not do because they don't have that, inherent fear or even, say, knowledge of death. They might have some sort of instinctive idea there, right? Because, you've seen, before we've seen the videos of like animals getting killed and another animal kind of knows they're dead, like kind of understand that they're dead and that they're not, ever going to come back. But, I think humans are unique in that they actually understand death on some sort of like more cognitive level. And I think it's most people, they, it's kind of built in, that fear of death and just trying to avoid death. And that's because what we're built to do. Yeah,
as I was saying it, I realized it wasn't a very strong argument. That death is an exception to the countervailing emotions argument, because death in itself is final, and so that itself is a reason to fear it. Is the lack of existence. So I will give that point to you, that it is possible that someone can fear death for a purpose of nothing above just simply lack of existence. So maybe it has nothing to do with purpose at all. Maybe it's just a fear of death in general. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a difference between the disposition of a person who fears death and a person who seeks meaning, right? So if you look at people who are towards the end of their lives, people who die peacefully are often people who feel that they have fulfilled their purpose. And so, my wife works at a old folks home, and she tells me stories all the time about people who will just cling to life. And, they have all these sicknesses and they're not comfortable. It's very clear that their quality of life is poor, but they hang on. And then, like, say their children come to visit them one day and they have this really nice visit, and then the very next day the person passes away. And there are just so many stories like this. And it makes me think that, we fear death, but there's something a little bit more transcendent happening there, which is that we cling to this world because we want everything to have closure, right? There are things that maybe we don't think are quite resolved. And when we finally get that feeling of satisfaction of, okay, I've done what I need to do here, then we feel like it's okay to let go and pass away.
Mhm.
right?
I think that's true because the way I think of it sometimes is that we love like stories, and stories need to have resolution. And some people would say that's kind of like a tertiary thing, like added on. But I think kind of the human narrative that we have inside our minds, stories try to emulate, right? So the stories that we like are the stories we like to tell ourselves, right? And if our own personal story doesn't have a resolution, you kind of same thing if you watch a movie, it doesn't have a good resolution. Like character just was weak, they didn't follow up on their things, they didn't really achieve anything, you have those regrets. So like, those are like if you're telling it back yourself the story of your life, and it's just kind of like it's not satisfying. I mean, if you're watching that movie, you'd probably be unsatisfied too. Like
Yeah.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
So, in all this discussion, have we? And I'm asking honestly, based on what we've said so far, are we sort of drawing a link between purpose and regret? Because it sounds like there might be some relationship between the two, like the search for purpose and the sort of escape from regret.
I think so to some degree because I think they can be that way, but I also think you can have purpose without regret necessarily. So like some people like they're just super driven to achieve things. Like I'm trying to think of someone good, but the certain like say scientists or just leaders and stuff where they gotta go up and beyond, and they kind of try to establish something just beyond them, like creating this foundation or creating a company that's gonna last say generations. And a lot of times there's a familial component to that because the idea is not just trying to make something for themselves, but also make something for their next of kin or for the world in general, right? Someone who might be a scientist studying some sort of disease might be trying to pass on that knowledge of how to cure that disease to future generations and solve, say, whatever it might be, say AIDS, cancer.
Well, yeah. So I'm not saying that people who do that stuff like have to have concurrent regrets, but is their desire to fulfill these ambitions and achieve this purpose, is it in some way subliminally linked to not wanting regrets?
I mean, you could always inverse it, though, right? I mean, this is where I think the question is a little bit tricky because you can always say the inverse, right? Like, why do you want to do this? Because I don't want people to die of this preventable disease, right?
And if a bunch of people did die, then it would be reasonable that that person might have regrets about having not succeeded. But that doesn't mean that that's a bad thing.
I don't think they would have regrets about not succeeding. They would have regrets on not working at it at all, right? I think that's where the regret is. Like, if they spent their time not working on the problem, I think that would be more of a regret because you can't. Maybe it's not true with certain people. Certain people are going to have, say, rational mindsets, but you can't. If you're trying to figure something out, your regret can't be not figuring that thing out if it's not known whether it can be solved.
Well, maybe, but it might not be a rational choice, especially if it's something close to you. Like, if you're a scientist studying cancer and your significant other passed away because of cancer and you spent your whole life doing research, but you never found an answer, it might be reasonable that at some point you'd ask yourself the question, could I have done anything differently? And the answer might be no. It might not be a rational thing. Like maybe you did your best to try and find something new in your research, but you didn't. So like I think there is some relationship between the quest for purpose and regret. And I don't necessarily think that it's all pessimistic because I think it is possible to like have the conversation I just described and then the conclusion is, okay, yes, I did my best, and then you can still end up being peaceful at the end of life, right? And you can say that you did everything you could or everything that you were here to do, even though you didn't achieve your goal. But I think that at some point, at the beginning of the goal, there is a subconscious discussion of like, where do I want to see myself at the end of life? And maybe it changes over time, and you don't necessarily do everything that you started off saying you were going to do, right? But there was some link to why you wanted to do it.
Yeah, I still don't know about that because, like, my mindset. So that can be true. So I don't want to say it's not true, But I think a lot of people, they're just kind of more in the moment. Like, they're just kind of doing what kind of pleases them. And there might be that kind of 30-year plan of regret sort of thing. But I think a lot of times, like, it's more of a technical matter. Or, like, what kind of, what I, not get off on, what's the right term? What I enjoy doing is programming. And kind of more technical things that are kind of technology related. And you could say that's what I get meaning out of. That's not really true. It's just a thing that kind of gives me that kick in my brain, right? More than anything else. And when I kind of start doing it, I get obsessive, right? And I can't stop doing it. It's not like I'm like, oh, this is giving me so much meaning. It's just kind of like, okay, my brain's not shutting off on this problem. I have to just keep going and keep going. And there's some certain technical things because, something I've wanted to be doing. And, I'm in school for computer science right now. But it's also a technical matter of, like, if this is something I want to do, I have to start now. Because if I wait till I'm, like, 60, there's no way of, like, actually getting into the career and kind of actually doing anything interesting. You could say there's a regret there, like fear of regret. But it's more like more time management.
Yeah, well, you are tying that to a potential regret. You're not saying that you will regret it. Maybe you won't, because maybe you'll find something better. But you're tying it to potential regret. And so you're sort of hoping that doing this is something that ultimately is what you want to do and will give you some purpose. But let's say it's not programming, right? Let's say that the meaning of life is a little bit more meta than that. Because so far we've talked about specific examples. And, even going all the way back to the beginning, right? If we talk about what color something is, that's pretty specific, but what if color is not the meaning of the object in the first place, right? The object has a certain color, it has a certain size, a certain texture, but these are all properties of an object that might make you like the object, right? Like it might be something that you enjoy because it's your favorite color or because it's a smooth surface, right? These are all qualities that you enjoy. Like you enjoy programming because it stimulates your brain. But those properties are not the meaning of life. They're simply conduits. So maybe the meaning is more meta. Like in my case, it might be that what I want out of life is, and I don't know this is just an example. Maybe I want to leave some type of creative footprint in the world, something that people can see after I die. And so maybe I've spent years drifting around trying to figure out what that is. When I was 19, I was in school for video game design. And I thought, maybe that's what I want to do. Make a great video game that people are going to enjoy. And then I became a chef, right? I love serving people great food. I want people to remember that I made great food for them, right? I want them to be happy when they eat my food. And then I move on to writing a novel, okay? Maybe leaving a novel in the world is going to satisfy that need, right? And then, you know what? Maybe I want to go into the military because serving my country is something people will remember. So all these activities are conduits, and they're part of the meta meaning, which is that I want to leave some type of footprint when I leave. Does that make sense?
Right. There's no specific end. Okay, there might be, there's like one end or one goal, but the goal is like a meta goal.
It's something that might be so meta that we can't quite put a pin in it. But it explains some of the behavior that you're describing, which is like, it seems like people just have this sort of hedonism, right? They just are going through their life and doing things that please them. And there's no specific reason to it, or at least we don't discern the reason. But yeah, it could be because the reason is so meta that we can't see it, and it's a moving target, and all that we're doing is experimenting with different conduits and trying to find our way to that, to whatever that thing is.
Right. I mean, I think you do have a good point there, even with like the hedonism that people kind of exhibit, because a lot of these people, I mean, if you, I think if you were to ask them, what's your main aim here? What's your main goal? They're here to have fun, party, and, they'll tell you something like that.
Yeah.
Of course, you could say that's not sustainable, so on and so forth. Maybe it's a bad thing to seek, right? Maybe it's maybe that's what gives you meaning, is kind of socializing, drinking, driving. No, not driving. But, maybe that's not sustainable, but, that is probably what gets them purpose and meaning. Just kind of doing that, or sometimes getting the meaning is looking at other people's meetings. Like, I don't know, some people are TV junkies. All they do is just watch TV, and they just want to relax and just kind of be entertained.
And to your point about people that like to party and go out and be with their friends, I've heard a lot of people and in a lot of younger people say that they want to do this before they settle down and get married. Right? I've heard that exact phrase many times. And what is that exactly? That's a rationalization tied to potential regret, which is what I'm talking about. And I can say from experience, because I had a kid when I was 21, and I am married, and I've had to work my whole life and didn't really do a lot of those activities that you're talking about.
Yep.
And I do feel a little bit like maybe I wish I'd done them, but I'm hopeful because I know that my kid's going to be in college in my 40s. So, and I don't know if I'm going to have more kids, but if I don't, then I know that there's going to be a time for me to travel and do the things I want to do. Right. And that, again, is part of that moving target. I don't know if that's part of my purpose or not, but I think that to some degree, that's what those people are thinking when they are doing these things. Like, at the time, they're just saying, I'm partying.
Yeah.
But there's a small part of their brain that is thinking, someday I want to get married. So I won't be able to do this stuff when I get married. So I should live in the moment and enjoy my life now. Right? Like, whether we like it or not, there's always some kind of meta connection to what we're doing.
Yeah, and it's not like it's untrue. I mean, let's say you're gonna do a lot of sleeping around with people. The best time to do that is when you're not married. I mean, preferably. I mean, unless you have a nice relationship where you're open and everything. But
I wouldn't say it's generally a good idea once you're married.
No, or kind of like doing lots of drugs, drinking, partying. If you do that in your 20s when you're single and ready to mingle and whatever, okay, that's great.
Yeah.
If you do it when you have a kid, kind of a bad dad.
Yeah, not the best.
So yeah, I think agree with that point, and kind of trying to. It's one way to put it. Maybe is you're trying to extract. Maybe meaning is not a good way, because I don't know if meaning is applicable. Because you could say you're trying to extract the most amount of meaning in that part of your life where you're capable, right? And then maybe what your aim is long term is when you're old to kind of live off the dividends of that, say, meaning you established.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's true. That the more there's sort of progressive happiness. I mean, I don't know if it would be true for everybody, but I think that when you achieve things that you set out to achieve, then there's sort of compounding interest on that.
One thing that I find kind of intriguing is whenever I hear people talk about travel, like people who did this kind of crazy stuff where they backpacked around, say, India when they were in their 20s, and they did it for 10 years and all this hitchhiking. The way I kind of hear those stories is they have no regrets about it. They would have done it a million times and it made themselves. It's something they're gonna remember their whole life, and they just loved it. Even if it was kind of hairy and kind of crazy situations, even wasn't that fun. They still have this huge, it's a huge portion of them, and they're gonna be reaping that investment into that experience their whole life.
Yeah, exactly. It's something that they can say that they did it. I want to go to Japan. That's one of the number one places I want to go in my life, and I think about it all the time. And I think that once I'm able to go to Japan, there might be, I can't say for sure, but I think it might be all right, well, I wanted to do that my whole life. I was finally able to do it. So if I'm not able to travel for a few years, I got to go to my number one place. So I think that the unhappiness that might come from having to not travel and do things that I like doing less, it might be mitigated by some of the happiness that was achieved when I went to Japan.
That's a real thing, because it's well documented that a lot of athletes, once they hit the top, they have nothing more to achieve for, because the whole thing is about trying to hit the top, right, and trying to become the best. And then when they finally become the best, some of them will be fine in that state, but a lot of them, they get super depressed and just kind of walk off the board. They just kind of walk off the plank, and they're oh, what am I supposed to do now? Like they don't have any search, like
Yeah,
anything they can
you're
do.
always trying to find the next thing, right? And I can say personally, in gaming, right? I'm very avid competitive gamer, and so there's this one game that I play, and I play ranked all the time, right? And I would get frustrated, I would get passionate, and I would practice nonstop and try to progress in the ranks. And my goal was just to get to the diamond ranks, which is, going to be about the top 8% in the world. And once I got there last spring, I stopped taking ranked seriously. And it was just fun after that. Like, up until that point, I would get irritated when I lose. I would be watching videos and trying to improve and thinking this is what I want to do. But, like, once I get there, I'm like, well, I don't need to try so hard anymore. And I can just, like, enjoy what I'm doing now. Right? So it's sort of similar to the sports thing in a sense of, like, except I didn't walk off the plank. Afterwards, like, I walked off the plank in terms of the fact that, like, I'm not improving anymore. I don't play at the diamond level now. But the point is that I'm completely satisfied now to play at lower tiers because I already know that I did it. And I know that it's not a sustainable lifestyle. I'm not going to, like, try and be at that level my entire life because there's no reason to be, right? Like, I proved to myself I can do it, and that was what I set out for.
Yep.
And I don't need to sustain that now. I already know if I wanted to, I could sustain it, but it doesn't make me happy.
Yep. I have a hard time relating to kind of I don't know, those sort of aspirations. I can kind of understand certain aspirations, but more like a meta goal, like the thing to push yourself with. But it's like, okay, let's say with strength training, or let's say a video game. Okay, so let's say the same instance. Like, my question, even before I start kind of taking that goal on, is, what end is there? Let's say I get to the bronze rank, or diamond rank, or whatever it is. Then I'm going to want to get to the gold rank, and then the platinum rank, and then this and this, and then number one. Then what if I'm number one? Am I just going to, like, try to maintain that for how long? Why? What's the purpose of any of this? And I shoot down any kind of, like, directives I have very quickly, because it's just, in the end, it's like, so what? Like, who cares? Like, if it's something for entertainment, that's fine. Because, like, I was playing this game, Doom, and, I was trying to get really good at it, just because I wanted to look badass. I mean, that's the end there. But, as far as, like, trying to achieve something with it, it's kind of like, what's the point? Like, I don't know.
Well, the interesting thing about what you just said is that you asked yourself, if I get to diamond rank, or if I get to, like, let's say number one, what is the purpose? What is the point? And then you said, in the case of Doom, the point is to look badass, right? So you attributed meaning to both of those goals. And granted that the meaning might not be your meaning in life, but the point is that everything that we do, we assign meaning to. Whether it seems pointless or not, it all compounds and becomes part of the meta, which again is something that might be fantastic. We don't know what the meta is exactly, but it's in our brain somewhere, and everything we do is kind of compounding towards it. So to summarize and kind of wrap this up here, that all goes back into what my opinion is, which is that the meaning of life is to find meaning. And everything that we do in our life, one way or another, compounds and plays positively or negatively into the meta, which is whatever concept it is out there that is subconsciously what we believe is our meaning.
Right. I would say that my base point's still there, that meaning's created. It's not, maybe it's inherent to humans, or like it's the human biology. But I think I have kind of walked back a little bit in that, like, I don't know. I think I was putting meaning on a pedestal, like, as if there's this, like, godhood that you try to achieve, where it's something, it's something more just casual, more, I mean, it can kind of have those levels of ascension, right? Let's say you're trying to, create a better humanity. That's a high meaning to achieve. I mean, that's on the pedestal of godhood. But, I think, kind of like we're saying, sometimes meaning is just on a more, say, general or low level, like just want to enjoy myself, have fun, or maybe raise a family. Maybe it's a little bit higher than, say, just trying to have fun. But, I think it's still maybe not inherent to the universe, but I'd say that maybe it is more achievable. Maybe people aren't just like, okay, maybe people are, just kind of zombies, but maybe not. I think I've taken back my impetus on that a little bit.
Yeah, and just to give in a little bit on my side too, I think that when we started, I was viewing meaning as more of like as something that's definitely out there in the universe that people are working towards. And I think that it is a little bit more malleable, so I'll give you that point. That I think that I'm right in saying it's not exactly transcendent. It's just something that's kind of built into us that we're working towards. But I'll give you your point, which is that it's not something scientific. It can't really be defined or pinned down, and it might be more malleable and different for each person, and that person might not exactly perceive it.
Right. Because it's kind of like a perceptual kind of construct.
Yeah. So I mean, I think we both kind of agree that meaning exists, but what it actually is might be different for each person, and it's definitely not exactly a transcendent subject, but it is something that is tied to the human condition.
Right. Well, if you disagree with us, let us know in the comments. Especially if you disagree with Patrick, let him know. He needs to know that. If you disagree with me, just tell me that you agree with me anyway. It'll boost my ego. And if you have meaning in your life, don't tell me about it. Don't make me jealous. Definitely like, subscribe, watch more of our videos. If you want to see awesome content, or just give a suggestion. Say, hey, I want to see you talk about, I don't know, penises or something like that. That'd be a great topic.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.